All right, welcome everybody to our webinar. This is on scaling accounts and permissions management. My name is Bridget Johnson. I'm the Senior Manager of Product Management, mainly focused on AWS IAM and dabbling in organizations, which we'll talk about today, and accounts and tagging. So I am very excited to talk about this topic because it is something that's very real. It's something that is on a lot of our customers' mind, and we're going to dive into it. So this is what we hear. We hear, hey, we have a goal. We are a central security team. We are a central admin team, a central DevOps team, and our goal is to enable our businesses to innovate. Our goal is to enable agility so our developers can move fast. Our goal is to give developers freedom so they can build. But there's always a but. You also want to ensure, well, we want to make sure they don't do dangerous actions like modifying networks or deleting a role. We are accountable for our security posture, so we need to make sure we can audit, and we want to have cost-effective solutions. And these things sometimes tend to be in tension a little bit, but the goal is to provide you the tools and the mechanisms so that it's easier for you to achieve both. And I'm really excited today to talk about how you can do that. And what we hear from this is essentially who can access what. And I want to break it down, right? Who in this webinar, this discussion I'm going to talk about is mainly your workforce users. I will talk a little bit about system or application identities, but I'll just use users as mainly my examples. The what on the right side of the screen are resources. And when I talk about AWS resources, I talk about not just in an account, but across multiple accounts, because we realize customers are growing. They are adding more resources. They're adding more accounts. You're adding more users. And then you have the permissions in the middle, which is granting access and connecting the two. And obviously, as your workforce grows and your resources grow and you build more on AWS, your permissions grow. And so how do you actually build a permissions management model and an account management model that scales with your organization? And this is how our new model is we're explaining. So first and foremost, think about guardrails. What permissions are always going to be true across all of your accounts, across your entire organization? And so these are, we're going to call them permission guardrails. There's a ton of guardrails out there. If you look in the organization space, I'll review some more today. And this is, I want this to always be true. I want to make sure no one can delete this role. I want to make sure CloudTrail is always on. I want to make sure this network setting never gets changed, right? So these are the things that are always true across your organization. And there's guardrails, just like this guardrail is preventing me from driving off the road. Your permission guardrails will make sure that no one can do something they're not supposed to. And then if you have guardrails in place, you can be more comfortable with granting general workforce permissions. They may be some general reads, some general rights, some general service privileges, and there's a couple ways to enable your workforce to move fast, but making sure they're operating within the constraints that you want to make sure that they are. And then finally, as you let developers or even systems, you have these a little bit broader permissions, some general permissions, you want to figure out like, okay, you've been doing this for a while, your patterns are pretty normal, then we can scope down permissions and you can dial permissions over time. So combined, you have guardrails, general access, and then you're looking at that general access and coming up with patterns so you can further reduce permissions. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to treat least privilege as a journey rather than having to do it on day one. If you try to do least privilege on day one, you're going to run up against some sharp edges. Developers don't know what access they need. They keep knocking on your door for more and more access. And what we want to do is enable you as a central security admin or a central team to set guardrails in place, give those developers freedom, have the audit mechanisms in place so you feel comfortable, and then let them build. And then as they mature and settle over time, you can scope it down. You're probably asking yourself, how am I going to do this? Like, whoa, that's a lot, but it's cool because AWS has a bunch of services that can help you do this. So today we're going to cover AWS Organizations and how you can set these guardrails across your organization or organizational unit. Then we'll talk about general workforce permissions. I'm going to go through permission boundaries and how to use tag-based access control and attributes to set some general permissions that help you scale so you're not updating policies for every new resource. And finally, using IAM Access Advisor to get that data so you can scope down permissions over time. So this is what we're going to cover today. First, we're going to talk about managing accounts with organizations. Really powerful service for you to use, and I want to make sure you understand the benefits. Second, I'm going to go through an account strategy and how you can think about organizing your accounts and what has worked for some customers. Then we'll go into permission guardrails, and I have a very exciting announcement, so please stay tuned for this section. And then we'll do how do you enable developers to create roles with permission boundaries. Permission boundaries was new in 2018. A lot of customers are using it. It's really powerful. And we'll talk about how you can scale permissions management based on tag values, my favorite policy of all time. And then we'll talk about finally dialing in permissions using Access Advisor and really automating those analytics. All right, here we go. So managing accounts with organizations. Organizations lets you centrally manage and govern accounts across your accounts. So a lot of things happening with organizations. One, it's central governance and management for multiple AWS accounts. I mean, you're talking even a few up to hundreds, sometimes thousands. Then with orgs, you can manage your billing, you can control access, which we'll talk about, some compliance things, security, a lot of features here to help support you in a multi-account management space. And then it also helps you automate account creation, create groups, organize your accounts, etc. So that's what organizations is and is growing. And to support that, there are a ton of features for you to go look at. And if you haven't looked at org lately, I really encourage you to do that. Favorite feature that customers are just really liking is this CloudTrail feature, right? If you are managing a lot of accounts, the one thing you want to make sure is that all accounts have CloudTrail turned on and that there's a central trail, and you can do that with AWS CloudTrail. There's some other ones I call out: CloudWatch events, config, directory service, sharing across multiple accounts, and VPC and region, firewall manager, license manager. AWS RAM is resource access manager. You can share resources within your organization very easily, and that helps as you separate accounts using workloads. Service catalog and single sign-on, and definitely more to come. So please keep a lookout of all the org-enabled features and services out there. This is the first batch, and there's going to be many more to come. Very powerful to go look at if you're managing multiple accounts. So speaking of multiple accounts, what is a good multi-account strategy? And we thought a lot about this, and one thing we need to start with is what is an account, right? An account contains your AWS resources. These are your buckets, your config rules, your batch, your lambdas, your EC2 instances, basically anything with an ARN. And they live in those accounts, and no one can get to those resources unless you set, you can use resource-based policies, or you let somebody assume a role into your account. It's the account is the hardest barrier you're actually going to have within AWS around a perimeter around your resources. So keep that in mind, because you actually have to take action to share those. Then you group accounts in your organization, and these are called organizational units. From this point forward, I'm going to call them OUs. And this simplifies management of accounts. You can group them into, hey, there's this group for individual accounts, there's this group for infrastructure accounts, there's this group for informational security accounts, etc. And you can actually create OUs within a single organization, or you can create OUs within other OUs and form a hierarchical structure. And one thing you really need to think about is as you grow your accounts and you separate workloads, which I'm going to talk about, how is your structure going to look like? And as we talk with customers, as we talk about use cases, this structure actually has worked well for a lot. And so I wanted to share it with you today. And you'll notice that this is not the structure of people's actual organization, like they're human organizations, right? You don't have root. There's no like CEO at the top there. And so I wanted to make sure that you understood it's not a one-to-one mapping. You could try to simulate it that way, but because these are your AWS accounts, these are your infrastructure, right? think about how you would map it from a technical perspective or mapping it that way. And so what we've seen work is you'll have an OU. The circles are OU. The triangles are accounts. Yes, you will have more than triangles, but only so many can fit on the slide. So you can imagine ... next to every single one of them. But first and foremost, separate your individual accounts. Right, so you can separate your individual accounts. These are all your personal accounts, like my personal Bridget account or my personal, Bob the developer account that essentially just needs to go play around for a while. Nothing really production. These are probably going to have some very strict rules on them, but they'll let people kind of roam around and play around as they need. I'm going to pop over to the right of my slide because I want to talk about application services last. So we have your individual accounts. Those are all in one OU. Then you have your information security accounts. So these can be, hey, we have pen testers. They need special privileges to be able to do that. We're going to put them in one account. Or, hey, we have some security checks and compliance checks that we do. We'll put those in another account and put all that data there. So those are accounts that we put in one OU. You can imagine that they might have a little bit more access than maybe an individual account. Then there's the exception account. So maybe there's a one-off use case, there's something you're working on that you don't really know, and they got an exception, and you want to make sure that they always live and are monitored and managed as an exception before they possibly maybe become an application service. And then infrastructure. This is any shared infrastructure accounts. Maybe your Active Directory lives in this account, or potentially any shared services that contributes to infrastructure, etc. All right, so looking at application services, right, there's a couple ways to break this down. And what it really comes to is how and why do you separate your workloads, right? And so you should be separating your workloads using AWS accounts. And this is a spectrum. This is, hey, you can have really coarse-grained account separation, or you can have very fine-grained account separation. And so first, to kind of think about how you do this, think about your isolation requirements. Some customers may have very fine-grained isolation requirements. This is due to compliance reasons, maybe PCI, maybe they just need, okay, these little things have to be isolated, and we're going to use accounts to do it. The second one to think about is how much support do you have for automation in your organization? The more accounts you have, the more automation that you need to do, auditing, to validate, to set up, tear down, etc. And then the other one you want to think about is what can I combine together? What do I need to separate apart based on what are some commonalities and similarities about rules I always want to be true, right? And so you can imagine, oh, wait, dev accounts probably always have the same set of permission guardrails, right? They only can use like S3 read and EC2, micro instances, etc. And then and prod may have different constraints there. And so just think about how you would group accounts and what are the similarities between them. And this will be a spectrum, and we've seen customers all across the spectrum. But what I do want to recommend is based on where you are, what your requirements are, is how would you actually support your OU structure. And when you think about organizing service accounts into OUs, there's two models that you can go with. One is the business unit type, and the other is the environment type. And these are the two that we've seen work best. And you want to think about how many business units will you grow to, right? And would that basically one OU per business unit scale all the way across? And what are the commonalities among those guardrails? If you have 100 business units and they all have the same guardrail, then maybe you would want to think about for their prod accounts, you may want to think about going to option 2. Versus if they're different, you might want to separate them out using option 1. And then how much can you automate? How much can you scale? And so in option 1, we have OUs with business units and the accounts for those business units underneath. In option 2, we actually have prod, pre-prod. Maybe you'd have dev and test and all that. And you would essentially put all of the prod accounts under one, all of the pre-prod accounts under another OU. And this basically says, hey, our guardrails, all the configuration and control that we have is going to be the same for all prod accounts, same for all pre-prod accounts, etc. This is where, it's hard for some customers to imagine because it doesn't align with their people structure, but people move, people change, business units move around, right? But a prod account most likely will always be a prod account. So keep that in mind as you organize your service accounts as we go through. And there's also a talk that I'm going to recommend at the end that goes more in depth with this. Okay, permission guardrails is my favorite topic today to talk about because I get to do a demo. All right, so service control policies. You can set permission guardrails by defining the maximum available permissions for IAM entities in the account. And this also includes root. So keep in mind, SCPs, that's what I'm going to call service control policies from here on forward. SCPs do not grant permission. They are simply saying this is the max, right? So if you have an SCP that's allow star.star, that's the default, then based on the IAM permissions in the account, the users will get their IAM permissions only. Well, let's say you have an SCP that says allow everything but deny directory service. Even if somebody in the account has full admin, they will not be able to make a directory service call. You can attach SCPs at the organization root. That's all the accounts in the organization. You can attach it at the OU, or you can attach it at individual accounts. And so this gives you a lot of flexibility when you're thinking about what controls do I want to put where, how to do that. And then anything attached to the root basically applies to all the OUs and accounts inside of them. So that's pretty amazing. Something that's new. You can now specify resources, conditions, and not action in SCPs. And this is really powerful because you can basically say, hey, deny delete of this role and a specific role. So you can put a role in every account and make sure that it stays there. So common use cases that we hear from customers why they want this feature, which is now available, is that you can restrict access from deleting common resources. I'm going to show you the role demo today. Then you can define exceptions for your governance controls. So you can say, deny access from everyone deleting this role except this role, right? And that means that that role could modify or delete itself. What we hear mainly for the exceptions is going to be like, deny everyone from modifying this networking setting except our admin role, right? Because that admin role may need to change that network setting one day. And then the other one that is very popular is essentially control access to AWS regions. I will name drop the AWS requested region context key. I don't have it in policy. I will show you maybe in my demos. And you can restrict regions, right? Hey, you can only request, you can only make API requests in the US East region, right? And that means anything in maybe Dublin or whatever regions you want won't work. Okay, so I'm going to do a demo. The new SCP editor is also available, and it makes it easier to author SCPs. I'm really excited about this editor. I'm also excited to show you the power of SCPs. So I'm going to do restricting access from deleting or modifying an IAM security audit role. I'm actually going to trim this demo down. I'm only going to do delete, but it works for modifying, trust me. So I'm going to create an SCP in my master account. Just to recall, this is off of the root. I'm going to create the SCP. I'm going to attach it to the root. And then I'm going to sign into a development account, so that's below it. And I'm going to try to delete that role. Okay, so here we go. For the purposes of my demonstration, I'm going to be using Chrome for my admin in my master account. You can see the name up here, admin master. I want to show you my accounts. I have two organizational units, unicorns and zombies, and under them I have a bunch of accounts. I have a dev account, prod account, but that's not the point because I'm going to set a full policy across all of these accounts. So I'm going to create a policy, and I'm just going to name it no delete role and do restricts deleting the role. Okay, and this is the new fancy editor that I was talking about. So on the side, I could type if I want to, but why type when you can click? And I'm going to delete IM, so I'm going to go search for IM. That's great. And then I'm going to delete the role here, or restrict. So right now I have IM, delete role here. And then, but I want to be able to delete roles, so I want to basically specify what role I don't want to delete. So I go down here. Oh, one more thing to know about this. In order to add a resource, you actually have to click in this resource land right there. And I'll click add resource. And it'll say what service. Because I only picked IM delete role, that IM is the only service. And then I pick role here, and it gives me the ARN format. And I don't care what account it's in. I don't want anyone to delete any roles across any of my accounts. And then I have a common role called audit. I have a longer name, but this is fine. I don't want anyone to be able to delete roles that are named audit in anything. So I'll add that resource. You can see my policy here. It says deny IM delete role, and the roles that I don't want people to delete are anything named audit dash. So I'm going to create this policy, and now you can see it's here. Now I need to attach it, so I am going to click on it, and then I clicked on root, and I'm going to attach it. Awesome. All right, now I'm going to go to a child account. I'm going to go to my, I believe it's Unicorns development account. It's up here, unicorns-dev. And so realize I'm a developer. I will tell you that I am I have full admin access right now. I can show you that if you need it. It's unicorns. Here we go. Oh, that's the one I created. Dev admin, here we go. That is what I'm working on right now, and you can see I have full admin access. And I'm going to try to delete that role called audit and see what happens. And I'm going to delete the role, and it's going to load some hasn't been used in a while, but I'm going to try to delete it, and you don't have permissions. Well, wait a second, I have full admin access. Why can't I delete it? Well, because that SCP has prevented me and created a permission guardrail. So that is pretty cool. All right, going back to that. So that is something you can do. You can implement in your organization. Check out the new policy editor. It's fun. All right. So what we also hear is, all right, we put your guardrails on, we're going to let our developers run freely, but there's, we want them to only act within their permissions. We don't really want them to be able to escalate their permissions or anything like that. And whenever you create a role, you want that role to basically say, hey, make sure this role only has their permissions or less. And that's where permission boundaries come into play. So permission boundaries allow you as a central admin team or even a local admin within an account to delegate and scale permissions management to developers safely. And so what this allows is you can say, hey, developer Bob, you can create roles, but you can only create roles with this specific boundary. And then developer Bob creates the role, he has the boundary, and so even if that role has full star access, the boundary will limit it, just like the SCP did, but this is on a per role basis, not on a per account or OU basis, per role basis. And so what ends up happening is the effective permissions are the permission boundary has to allow it, and the permission policy attached to the role has to allow it. And this is the flow that I just explained, but we're going to go into it a little bit deeper, that you would expect, right? So you have an admin. The admin creates a policy that's going to be the maximum permissions. Maybe this is just S3 read or S3 read and write in the case that I have. Actually, the case we're going to use is S3 read and write with specific regions. So admin creates the maximum boundary. Admin says, I'm going to allow developers to create roles, but it has to have these maximum permissions on that role. The developer creates the role, and the only way that the role is allowed to be created is if they also pass in the permission boundary, which is that maximum permission that the admin defined in step 1. And then finally, the developer can pass the role to an application and start using it. And admin in step 1 is very happy because no one has any more permission than they started with. Let's see it in action. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the developer role to create a role with a permission boundary. And then I'm going to demonstrate that permission boundary in action by doing some stuff in S3 on the command line. So here we go. I'm going to be a developer, and I want to show you one thing before I switch into my developer role. I'm using my same setup from reInvent. I'm going to show you that talk later, but that's why there's some reInvent words in here. Okay, so I'm going to go to challenge 3 permission boundaries. And this will be my developer role, and basically I can pass roles, I can create things in certain region restrictions or read things, and this is a cool policy, one of my favorite. It basically says, hey, developer, once I get to this role, you can create roles. They have to be named something called unicorns dash, and you must have the region restriction permission boundary when you create the role. So that's pretty awesome. Okay, so I'm going to go to be this challenge. So I'm now the developer, which policies you just looked at. And I'm going to try to create a role. And remember, it has to be named unicorn. So I'm going to create a role for Lambda, even though there. And I'm going to give it, let's see. S3 read write. This is going to be pretty generic, enables S3 read write access. And I'm going to fail on purpose, but I'll just go to next, and I will call this unicorns dash. Okay, and if you're on the phone, you're like, well, it's not going to work, it's not going to work. Well, let's test it. It doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Oh, I didn't set the permission boundary that I am required to set by my admin. So I go back to permissions, I go to the permission boundary, and I say, yes, I need to set a permission boundary. Oh, I remember that region something or other. Oh, region restriction, here it is. And then I click next, and now you're like, oh, she's going to be able to create it. She's going to be able to create it. And here it is. I had that role. It is created. It's at the bottom. I do want to show you the one I have staged, like a cake, like a cooking show. It's like, here's the cake out of the oven. And I'm going to show this on the command line, right? So at this point in time, I have this policy. This is the permission that the role has. And it allows pretty general put get object in S3. No restrictions on the resource, no restrictions on the region. If I look at the permission boundary actually has, and I'll scroll down to, oh, here we go, S3 put and get object, but I have to have US West 1 and 2. And so I want to show you, I'm going to try to upload files. And here I'm going to go to S3 for you. And I have 2 buckets. I have 1 bucket in London and 1 bucket in US West. And remember, we're talking about the permission intersection, right? So the effective permission is the boundary has to say yes, and the permission policy says yes. And right now, my permission policy says you can upload objects anywhere, and my boundary says you can only upload objects in US West. And so I'm going to go to my command line, and I'm going to try to, I'm going to get my command here. I'm going to try to upload a picture of my horse. His name is Pickles. And I'm going to try it in the failed demo bucket, which lives in the London region. And to your exact guess, it failed. And it failed because, guess what? I don't have access to put objects in there because my boundary is preventing me. Finally, I'm going to do this here. Oh, I didn't do it with the profile before. I will add that to the next command, and it uploads perfectly. And so then you can basically see that I upload an object from there. Okay, so those are permission boundaries in action. They are very powerful. It lets your developers have access to create all the roles they need for all the Lambda functions, for all the EC2 instances, etc. Next up, using tags to scale permissions management. Tags are incredibly powerful, especially when you talk about attribute-based access control. And so what is ABAC, right? And ABAC is simply matching when it comes down to it. You have humans and systems, those are roles, those are users, they have attributes that are tags, right? And then you have existing resources that are also tags on resources like project equals bubbles, project equals pickles. And then you also want to create new resources. And so what ABAC allows you to do is allows you to write some general permission rules based on attributes. And this means that you can have pretty granular access without having to update policies every time you create something new. And so here are the components of tag-based access control in AWS. So first, you need to allow users to create tags when creating resources. That was that bottom angle line. But you want to require specific tags when users create these resources. You want to make sure that those resources are tagged project equals bubbles, right? And so you do this using the request tag condition key. Next, you want to say, hey, you can control which existing resources and values developers can tag. So maybe they can tag everything in project equals bubbles. They can't tag anything in project equals pickles. And, oh, wait, they can change that project equals bubbles to something else, like, project equals, let's go shampoo. And so that's kind of fun. And you do this with a combination between request tag and resource tag. These are your two condition keys that you want to put in policies so you can talk about and use tag-based access control. And then finally, you want to say, hey, everybody, hey, developers, you can control resources. You can start and stop instances based on your tag value. And so you can say, hey, you can start and stop instances, any instance tag with your tag. Right? And that goes back to that's those same rules. And what you're putting in here is basically give them a tagging structure to use, let them create resources, let them manage those resources based on a tag value. Then they can grow and scale and they don't have to come to you every time to update their policy. I love tag-based access control. I think it's super powerful. There's a lot you can do with it. And so please check it out. More and more services are going after tag-based access control across AWS. I tweet about it often, so keep checking them out because they keep adding. All right, last is how do you, so a little recap here, right? You have your guardrails, they're going strong, they're preventing those dangerous actions. You've enabled your developers to move pretty freely, letting them create roles, letting them manage their own things in their account. And you're like, okay, now I get you. You're maturing. You've been around for a while. I want to see what you're doing, and I want to make sure that I can scope down permissions over time. And so our answer to that is Access Advisor. And so how do you automate analyzing your permissions using IAM Access Advisor APIs? 3 steps to this, right? As you look into the permissions and the activity that people have that they're using across your AWS accounts. One is determine the services that are last accessed, compare them to the permissions that they have, and remove unused permissions. So I'm not going to demo this in real life because you get a long API response, but essentially what it looks like is you can go to the console and I can see under any role or user, you can even go to a policy and say like, oh, this role is pretty powerful. This is actually my admin role. And I use SNS and S3 and Lambda and API gateways, playing around with that. And then I haven't really touched CloudTrail. I haven't touched Cognito in 32 days, but maybe, okay, that's fine. In 119 days, I haven't touched directory service or organizations. Okay. Well, I haven't touched that in a long time. It kind of doesn't fit in my 60-day window. So here's everything I have access to on the left side. And on the right side, all the stuff in green, I've used pretty recently. I call it in the last 60 days. The stuff in red, I haven't used in a long time. Even ACM, I haven't used ever. And so strike those out, right? You remove those permissions. And so what I did was I ended up detaching a bunch of managed policies that granted that permission. And now I'm left with actually, you can see here, I actually have the list of things that I actually do use. And that is a process that you continue to use over time. Maybe over time you learned that API Gateway wasn't meeting your needs, or you move that workload into another account, and so you would restrict that over time as well. All right, So just to recap, we have guardrails. Focus on guardrails. What can you bump up to the account, the OU level? And think about your account strategy and use AWS Organizations and the powers and the controls that you can set centrally. This will make your job a lot easier. You have multi-account management with organizations, organizing your accounts we covered with organization. Then think about your general workforce permissions, right? These are your permissions you want to give your developers, and be okay letting them have a little bit more, knowing your guardrails are gonna take effect. And so then you can go for least privilege over time. And so we covered permission boundaries, we covered ABAC and using tags. And then finally, as your systems mature and settle down, you can start removing permissions that are unused. And that will give you a path of, hey, you can get to least privilege over a journey, but you can also let your developers build fast and quickly on AWS and make sure nothing happens with your guardrails. So that's the recap. I will say that I would love for you to learn more. Here are my top picks. 2 videos. One is, if I talked a little bit about policy today, I showed a little bit about policy. If you really want to become a policy master, I gave a talk at reInvent on it. I go into the actual tag-based access control policy, the requested region policy. Really geek out on JSON in this talk, so if you're interested in learning more. And then on the multi-account space, architecting security and governance across a multi-account strategy, that got cut off, is a really good talk. It involves a customer who's done this before, and they had a lot of great learnings that they shared on stage. So that was also another reInvent video. So take a look on that. And then 2 blogs if you want more details on what we talked about today. One was automate analyzing your permissions. We talked about that topic, but if you actually want to know the API calls, you want to know the response, and you want to know how to do it, that blog will walk you through it. And then also the tag-based access control if you want to see the policies and the thought process around using IAM tags, which are tags on users and roles, with your auth decisions and tags on resources. That's a great article as well. I would love to say thank you, and we are opening it up for questions. You can type them in. And thank you for your time. Thank you for being interested. I love this topic. Feel free to provide feedback and let us know what you want to hear more of. All right. Thank you.